Hello, I'm Steve Gold with the Business Development Center at ODU. I have the pleasure of interviewing again or getting with Greg Tomchick from Valor. Okay, let me get this. Valor Cybersecurity. I'm going to get that right sometime. Is that correct? Is that correct? Did I get it right?
Yes, sir. That's correct. Always a pleasure to be here with you, Steve.
All right. Well, we had an earlier interview, which you were introducing a event that we're having here in the next day or so about small businesses, small business contractors with the government, and the importance of cybersecurity. And I've had the opportunity to chat with some different small businesses out there in preparation for this your event that you're having online and in person. And they keep saying, well, I don't need to do anything. All I need to do is I'm selling to the government. I'm doing my widget to the government. And all I need to have is some insurance and, liability insurance. What's the plus or minus to that?
Yeah, Steve, cyber insurance is typically the go-to hot button. But, like we've mentioned before, that only covers your liability if something bad goes wrong. It doesn't cover your brand reputation. Some of the costs associated outside of what insurance covers, that's where we see the cost of an incident really skyrocket, whether that's a false claim, saying you do certain security measures that you do not do, or having an incident because you're not putting things in place that you're supposed to put in place. So insurance has always been the easy button. Insurers and carriers are starting to cover less, especially if it's a nation state type of attack, which most of these cyber incidents are. So you really have to think about when you go to the table with the insurance providers, making sure you have some things in place, you can save time and money if an incident does come up.
Yeah, well, so you're not saying don't get the insurance, but you need to do something to make sure you're doing everything you can. Is that?
Yeah, it's a great vehicle. It's like having car insurance, but if you don't wear your seatbelt, or you get home insurance, but you still leave your burners on during the day, there's going to be something that comes up. So making sure you have the safety net in the background, but also doing things to minimize something from taking place is always key in our opinion.
But if you do have a cyber attack, and I would assume so you have insurance and that pays off the liability with the government. How does the government contractor, any government agency, how do they look at you if you've been hacked or they've had some sort of encroachment via, through you into their system? I don't think they're really fond of that whole idea, are they?
Yeah, it's a huge destroyer of trust. We've been brought into some incidents over the past couple of years, arms dealers, companies that are manufacturing for these big aircraft carriers. When you have an incident, the Department of Navy gets involved, DIBCAT gets involved, DCMA, maybe they pull the FBI in. So there's a lot of costs that come into play from both a reputation standpoint, and you start to see what's under the hood, which most of the time it's not pretty. And these organizations, need to keep in mind that these organizations need to be reported to when an incident does happen. And that puts you kind of behind the curve if you don't have plans and procedures and controls in place.
You got any examples of where it went wrong and maybe when it went right?
Yeah, definitely a lot for when it went right, because that's what we try to produce at the end of the day. When it went wrong, we've seen recently, Massachusetts National Guard airman leaked some classified information, and he now got arrested. The contractor that he was with under the National Guard gets some bad light as well. So that's kind of a situation where it went wrong. U.S. Marshal Service, their federal records database was breached. That makes people, not necessarily trust these government organizations. But what does that say for a contractor like an Aerojet? We were recently brought into a energy system technician. So they would go on bases, they would architect the energy systems behind these military bases. And they got in, the threat actor got into the military base through that third-party energy system technician. And imagine who the government's going to look to. They're going to look to that technician, that contractor, to say, why did you not do what you said you were going to do when you agreed to this contract? And that's the reason that CMMC and DFARS was created, because these companies have to self-attest and actually sign on the dotted line to say, we are doing these type of security measures, and we know what it's going to take to protect both the government and our contractor from cyber threats. And we're seeing that a lot of times as, not the case, which is frightening, both from a national security standpoint and from a Department of Defense standpoint.
Now you said CMMC. What's that stand for?
Yeah, the Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification. It came about in end of 2019. And the reason for that is because we were losing billions of dollars in defense intellectual property. It's come a long way since, but we're continuing to see it roll out. The government is still kind of giving confusing signs to contractors on when it's going to become an actual rule. But they are now making it not a self-attestation, but an auditable standard that these organizations of any size or shape have to align with, whether they're a one-person contractor or a 100,000-person contractor. And there's different levels of security protections that you are required to have in place under the CMMC model.
Yeah, what kind of a security, like a small business, what would you think would be the minimum thing that they would need to have to do if they're going to bid on these contracts? Let's say I'm a new, we'll go back to the widgets. Widgets are popular. And all of a sudden we have a stack of widgets, and this government agency wants to, and it could be, I guess it could be federal, state, it doesn't matter really. They like our widgets. We want to sell them widgets. What would be a minimum, they would be looking for as a contractor?
Yeah, and the minimum standard has kind of met between what they're looking for from the contractor and what some of these cyber insurance companies are starting to look for. In the CMMC model specifically, when we start to talk about defense, they have a level 1, which is 17 controls. It's basically making sure you have access control. So it takes a user multiple factors in order to log in. Some people refer to it as multi-factor authentication. Making sure you understand who has access to what level of access they have, making sure you know what activity is going on in your network, and that could be a firewall that's monitored by a tool, and then making sure you have an instant response plan and some policies and procedures in place to be able to guide the daily user's action. That could be the contractor on a base or an administrator, at your office, making sure that they have the right training in place where they can be situationally aware so they don't click on that link that we typically see folks click on. And that's where it all starts. It starts at that kind of level 1 maturity where you're really laying a foundation for security, and then it goes to advanced and then expert. So we see that across any government agency. They're starting to have these structures where no matter what you're producing, you have to get to at least level 1. And as you start to take in more sensitive government information, you start to move up that maturity scale.
So it's more than what I'm used to back in the day, where you just had a safe with a little sign that you put open closed on it, and then had that red, yes, you smile. I'm one of those old types, safe with a little letter thing. It flip-flopped, like open close. So it's gone well beyond that then nowadays.
Yeah, that's one of the big things, Steve, that we continue to see is the lack of consistency in marking documents. If a contractor does not see FOUO for official use only, or CUI, or sensitive, if they don't see it on these documents, they may not handle it in the right manner. So that's a big contention point between the Department of Defense, DCMA, who kind of manages a lot of these records, and then the DoD kind of contracting officers, figuring out whose responsibility it is to mark these documents so they can be handled appropriately. That's one of the conversations we've been intimately involved in to try to help kind of give our perspective to it, to say, here's what's in the best interest of the Department of Defense and national security, but here's what's reasonable from the contractor standpoint. And somebody's got to raise their hand and say, I'll be the accountable party to bring these folks together to make sure we accomplish the common mission, which is, protecting national security, protecting what we're developing for the American warfighter at the end of the day.
If I'm a small startup business, and we're called small business, well, how would you define right now? What's the numbers? What's the definition of a small business now? What's the number of employees? What's it gone down to?
I believe it's below 100. I believe it's below 100 people.
So you got about like maybe 20, 30 employees. And you're still new in the widget factory. Widgets are us. And I've got that. Is this something I could, is there a guideline online from the government you could do? And but how hard is it to read if you're trying to do it yourself?
Yeah, it's not very prescriptive, and that's one of the big contention points. It's very dry information. You can go to NIST 800-171. That is a framework that CMMC and a lot of government requirements are based off of. NIST is National Institute of Standards and Technology. They're very intertwined into cybersecurity requirements as well as best practices. So I think that's a great place to start. NIST 800-171A is the assessment guide. I think if you're a small business, 20 to 50 people, start with the assessment guide. And if you can implement it internally in partnership with your IT company, go for it. But if you would like to, save some time and money, look to folks like us or companies that do what we do to kind of cut through it and say, what do you do as a business? Here are the requirements you have to implement. Here's the prioritized best way to do it from a cost and time standpoint. You'll save a lot of headaches. I think I mentioned this last time, Steve. My business partner and I were both defense contractors before we started this business. We saw how hard it was and how high the barrier was in order to get started. So we started our company to really lower that barrier and say, it's not going to cost you to have a conversation. Let's have a conversation around what's best for your business to put you on a track to be able to take action. And that's really the biggest step, most important step that these organizations will take.
And now you put everything in place and you got that. Have you got any stories that where someone's done everything they can and, they have an incident? Oh, and, was there they did it right, still any kind of like a positive? I know, okay, you're hacked, you're not hacked. Okay, you're not hacked. Okay, fine. You must be doing something right, or they just don't pay attention to you, whoever's going after the widgets. But if you have everything in place and the company can prove everything, what's the benefit of having something that say, well, I did this. I did everything I physically could do. Is there any?
Yeah, it's a great question, Steve. You'd be surprised how many companies have it in place, but it's not as valued as companies who don't have it in place because a majority kind of sit in that seat. We've actually come across incidents where it was a small metal fabrication company. They were producing metal for these aircraft carriers. They were doing everything right because they acted in 2019. They started to put some things in place. They had their SPURS score, which is the risk rating that the Department of Defense puts in place, up to about a 70. So they were doing great compared to their peers. But what happened was the prime contractor had an incident, which ended up impacting them, which at the end of the day, the Department of Defense, the Navy specifically, was knocking on their door saying, this was your fault. And they basically laid it all out and said, we have a binder of everything we've done up to this point. We have all these controls in place, but we have to make sure the prime can get in our environment to pull certain things from contracts, during contracts, documents, schematics, things of that nature. And that was the downfall, was access by the prime to the subcontractor systems, which is something they really, couldn't necessarily prevent. They can monitor to it and then react, but they did everything that they could possibly do. And it came through as mentioned, a prime or a vendor in their network, which is really one of those unfortunate things. But you have to continue to have these conversations with your prime contractors, with your subcontractors, with any vendor to say, what does your security look like? And does it align with the standard that we have internally as an organization?
Yeah, in this case, though, it was the smaller contractor, the sub to the prime.
Absolutely.
There was found no fault on their part. That was the finding.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they initially came to the subcontractor and said, this is your fault. They laid it all out. They did a further investigation and realized that it was the prime contractor. So they kind of, let the subcontractor run free, and, really decided to go after the prime contractor as the culprit in this situation.
So if I was another prime going for a bid and I needed subs, even in this instant, is because they did everything right, this would make this subcontractor to a prime a more desirable partner to go
Absolutely.
in, to say, I've got this. These are, it's one of those unfortunate worlds we need to get involved in, like it or not. But again, I am fascinated by how do you go from baseball into cybersecurity? That fascinates me. How did you actually, you and your partner, you said you were government contractors, but how'd you get involved?
Yeah, so I actually started my government contracting career after baseball. I was a huge team guy. Both my parents were military, so it was my logical next step to get into either the on the civilian side or go into the Navy to some extent. And I ended up finding a good blend with a contractor locally that had a business perspective as well, which helped set the foundation for where my career headed, which was more in the private sector, but supporting defense contractors who were serving the American warfighter at the end of the day.
So from baseball to cybersecurity.
Yeah, it's a unique story. I don't meet many folks like that, but I do get baseball players reaching out for internships, things of that nature, to say, I like what you did. I like technology. Can you teach me how to get into cybersecurity? And that's where I thrive as a person, to say, here's some transferable skills that you can utilize to get into a hot industry that every company needs now or will need in the future.
And I think of the idea that in baseball, the ability to play with a team, being able to work with teams, the strategy, thinking as a team, and what needs to be done at any given time is going to be extremely helpful. But well, Greg, I really enjoyed this opportunity to chat with you. But if there's anyone looking at this video that'd like to get in contact with you, how can they do that?
Yeah, definitely check us out. Our website is valor-cybersecurity.com. We're all over LinkedIn, so look me up, Greg Tomchick, on LinkedIn. You can find our company on there. And then, we're based out of the Assembly Building in Norfolk. If you're ever around the area, we'd love to give you a tour. Love to sit down for a conversation and see if we can make something happen.
Greg, thank you very much for taking this time to chat with us. And again, I am Steve Goad with the Business Development Center at Old Dominion University.
Thanks so much, Steve.
Take care. Bye.